the Missouri School of Journalism, welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. They come from Syria and Eritrea, from the Sudan and other impoverished and war-torn countries in Africa and the Middle East. They arrive in Europe with hopes of a new life, but for some migrants, their journey ends in death on the Mediterranean. According to the International Organization for Migration, more than 3,000 migrants died or disappeared in 2014 trying to cross the sea from Africa to Europe, many in small open boats and inflatable dinghies. The problem has grown much, much worse this year. In the past month alone, more than 1,300 people have died or disappeared. The issue has become so severe that the European Union is debating launching military strikes on the human smugglers who carry the migrants across the sea. And European governments are also debating what to do with those who make it across. Nearly all of the more than 65,000 who have survived the trek have landed in 3 countries: Greece, Italy, and Malta. That's led to calls for other European nations to accept quotas of refugees. But given how dangerous the journey is, why are these people making this trek in the first place? And what, if any, solutions are available? Our guest today from Los Angeles, Niels Frenzen, a law professor at the University of Southern California who specializes in migration law. From Madrid, Aurora Moreno, a contributor to Spain's El Mundo and editor of the blog Por Fin on Africa. And from New York, Gregory Maniatis, he's the senior advisor to the United Nations representative for migration. He's also the Senior European Policy Fellow at the Migration Policy Institute. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Gregory Maniatis, tell us just a little bit about who these people are that are coming in such large numbers and why are they coming now?
Thank you, Jason. So you have at this moment about 51 million people who have been displaced primarily by conflict around the world. So these are people who have a right of some sort to international protection, and most of them are internally displaced people, IDPs, but a large number of them are refugees who've crossed international borders. So the people who are crossing the Mediterranean right now are principally those fleeing conflicts in the Middle East and Africa. The number one population are Syrian refugees. About a third who are reaching Europe right now are from Syria. And then you have people from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from the Middle East, the greater Middle East, like Afghanistan, Pakistan. So you have a large number of Syrians and many others from other conflicts, fleeing conflicts, mostly in Africa.
And do you have a sense that the people who are fleeing have a good sense of the risks involved in this journey? Because certainly being in these refugee camps has to be a really terrible life, but it's still better than taking these risks in the Mediterranean, one might think.
Well, clearly not. I mean, they are willing to pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to cross the Mediterranean. They're very well informed. They know the risks. They are just as well informed probably as we are. And they are willing to take that risk because their homes have been taken over back in Syria or Iraq by ISIS, for instance, or simply they've been destroyed. And I think there's those who are moving immediately to Europe, and then there are the others who are basically languishing in refugee camps. There's 1 million in Lebanon, almost 1 million in Jordan, over 2 million in Turkey. And after 6 months, a year, year and a half, you realize that this is not a future for you. So at that point, you are willing to take the risk. I'll note that the majority of, that about half of the refugees in these camps are children, and the majority of those children are not in school. So after a year of having your children not in school, I think the risk seems smaller, but it's about 3 or 4% chance of dying to cross the Mediterranean. I'd like to add one point, which is that while the news cycle is focused on the Mediterranean passage, and especially the one to Italy, thus far this year, up until now, there's been about 100,000 people who have crossed into Europe. Only about 30% of those have gone the central Mediterranean route through Italy and Malta. Another 30% of those have gone through the eastern Mediterranean route, primarily from Turkey into Greece and Bulgaria. And 40%, 40,000, the largest number, actually go across land via Serbia into Hungary.
The largest number is going across via land. This is dominating the news cycle in part because some of the wrecks are so horrific. In fact, one of the boats that went down not too long ago had 700 people on it. Correct me if I'm wrong here, and that's roughly half as many who are on the Titanic when that sank more than 100 years ago. But Aurora Moreno, I wanted to ask you, tell us, what do we know about how people are making this journey from the Middle East or from Eritrea or wherever their home country is to Libya? Because Libya seems like a place that is not an attractive transit hub, given that it's in the middle of a civil war right now.
Well, most of the people coming from the south of Africa or East Africa, it can take them maybe years to arrive to Libya. They go through the deserts. They are very exposed to mafias. They usually have to pay. As the other guy was saying, they must save money to pay to the smugglers to get into a boat in Libya. It's a very, very, very hard trip they have to do. And there are lots of them that they don't even arrive to Libya, but we don't know too much about them. And they are also people that are dying, and they are not in the accounts.
You're talking about refugees that die, say, while they're crossing the Sahara to get to Libya.
Yeah, that's it. They have to cross to go to huge distances. It's especially difficult for women. They used to be raped very easily. They can get pregnant. They have to carry their children during the way. It's a very hard situation. There are also some of them. I've read some testimonies of people from the south of Africa that were working in Libya. When Libya collapsed, they had to start looking for another place to be.
Niels Frenzen in Los Angeles, what do we know about the networks that are taking people from refugee camps or from some of these other source countries and then getting them across the Mediterranean? Who is operating this business, if you will?
Well, I mean, there probably are a lot of different operators, and they're responding to a demand on the part of desperate people. They're certainly taking advantage of desperate people. We see, for example, in Libya, and we see this also in the Eastern Mediterranean, we see different rates of passage, if you will, being charged by different smuggling organizations, depending on the amount of money that the refugee, that the asylum seeker has. Syrians are being charged higher amounts than many sub-Saharan Africans, for example. You know, going back to your question about Libya, Libya right now has, and why so many people are transiting through Libya, Libya has two governments right now. We have a government in the east, we have a government in the west. And there is some evidence, at least according to The Guardian and other journalists who are covering the situation on the ground, there is some evidence that the two respective governments in Libya are profiting from the smuggling operations. So you not only have the criminal mafias, the criminal gangs, there is also evidence of state involvement. There's certainly been evidence, for example, of Eritrea, the Eritrean government profiting from assisting some of the criminal smuggling organizations that are facilitating the departure of Eritreans either from Eritrea or from camps outside of Eritrea.
This is Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. This week we look at the ongoing issue of illegal migration to Europe and what can be done to solve the problem. Joining me from Los Angeles, Niels Frenzen, a law professor at the University of Southern California. From Madrid, Aurora Moreno, a freelance journalist and editor of Por Fin on Africa. And from New York, Gregory Maniatis, a senior European policy fellow for the Migration Policy Institute. If you're interested in more Global Journalist content, visit us online at globaljournalist.org. There you can read in-depth articles on international affairs and free press issues and download past episodes from our archive. We're also on social media. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at GlobalJourn. Gregory Maniatis, last year the United States had a rather large immigration crisis of its own with children from Central America coming up through Mexico and gathering at the U.S.'s southern border. And one of the ways that the U.S. and other countries addressed this was by putting out public service messages in Honduras and in El Salvador to sort of counter some of the messages that people there were getting from these networks that were encouraging people to leave. What sort of effort is there to sort of warn people about the risks of this journey?
I want to comment first about something you said in the lead into this segment, which is you referred to illegal migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean. I think it's critical that the distinction be made between asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants. So in the Mediterranean, in Europe in general, about half of those who reach Europe and apply for asylum are granted asylum, international protection of some kind, which means that they did nothing illegal. It is not illegal to flee a country that is at war. It is not illegal to try to get into safe territory. Europe is safe territory. So there is nothing illegal about what they are doing. That's critical, I think, to note. The question of what is being done in terms of conveying the dangers of the journey to those, whether it's in Central America or in Africa, there are campaigns. You have to ask, however, whether or not those who are undertaking these journeys don't already know the danger. They certainly know the danger. I don't know the deterrence effect of telling people that what they're doing is risky. We don't have much evidence. There have been some efforts, as you mentioned, in Honduras and elsewhere in Central America. There have been efforts in Mali by the EU. They've set up an information center. Quite honestly, that didn't go anywhere. This spring, the European Commission is planning on setting up another such information center in Niger with the express purpose of also doing that, conveying how dangerous the journey is. I just suspect that it is not something that will deter people who have very good sources of information.
Aurora Moreno, tell us, if you would, about the effort now to assist people once they're in the boats in the Mediterranean. We understand there are a number of different European navies there, commercial vessels, even private charities now that are trying to assist some of these boats that get in trouble. How effective is that response?
Well, there are too many actors implicated in the rescue, but I like first to say something. There has been a change in the European Union response. Until last year, we had Mare Nostrum. It was an operation led by Italy, and it was being very effective, more or less. The mission of them was rescue. They had a huge, an important budget to save lives. But in October 2014, it changed. It was European Union took charge, and they start to work with Frontex, Operation Triton, and that has been the change. Now they have 1/3 of the budget for working with the refugees. Their mission is only surveillance, and they don't have the resource. So
starting last year, the budget was cut for this, and the mission was changed from rescuing refugees to surveillance.
To surveillance, that's it. And the problem is that the biggest part of the rescue has gone now to NGOs. They are doing an extraordinary work, but it's very hard for them. So the result is being the increase in the number of deaths in the Mediterranean. Anyway, it's true that when they arrive to Malta or to Lampedusa, they are being received by Save the Children, Red Cross. They are getting everything they need to start or to start living in the country of destiny.
Niels Frenzen, you heard Aurora Moreno talking about this rescue effort now. How does the way the European response has been structured, how does that compare with other boat refugee crises in the past? In the 1970s, there was a huge outflow of migrants, immigrants, asylum seekers from Southeast Asia. How does this response compare with that one?
Well, I mean, in regard to the situation in the mid-1970s off of Vietnam, there was ultimately a massive international response that was led by the United Nations that ultimately rescued and processed upwards of 900,000 Vietnamese boat people. And so that was a massive coordinated international response. We're not seeing that in the Mediterranean. Aurora was just talking about what Italy did for 12 months, ending last October with the Mare Nostrum program. That was the closest that we have seen. It was a humanitarian response, but Italy has stepped back. The EU has stepped back. And obviously, what has been talked about lately in Brussels is a potential military response on the part of the European Union to stop smugglers' boats, albeit empty smugglers' boats, but just a very counterproductive, militaristic response that is the opposite of what is needed right now in the Mediterranean. We're talking about situations in
I mean, you say it's counterproductive. Why couldn't a military response effectively stop people from coming?
Well,
if you sink all the boats when they're empty?
I mean, if that is the question, would it be operationally effective? Absolutely. We could blow up the boats, we could blow up the bridges, we could bomb the roads, we could blow up fuel depots, and so effectively we could stop immigration. Spain has shown back in the 2006, 2007, Spain showed through its cooperation with Senegal and Mauritania, it effectively stopped the movement of people from Western Africa to the Canary Islands. But that's not the question. The question is, how do you do this in regard to being compliant with international law and the obligations that the European Union and individual states have? As Gregory was saying, what these individuals are doing is not illegal. People have a right to leave a country, even if it is not their own country. They have a right to seek asylum in third countries. And under EU law, the European Union law guarantees the right of individuals to seek asylum in member states.
This is Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. This week, a look at how best to deal with the problem of immigration into Europe from Africa. Joining me from Los Angeles, Niels Frenzen, a law professor at the University of Southern California. From Madrid, Aurora Moreno, a freelance journalist and editor of Por Fin en Africa. And from New York, Gregory Maniatis, a senior European policy fellow for the Migration Policy Institute. Gregory Maniatis, I wanted to pick up on one of these points that Niels was just touching on. Right now, there is a debate within the European Union about what to do with the people who are in these refugee camps in Italy and elsewhere. You mentioned that about half of migrants, half of these people coming are being granted asylum. So, and what happens to the rest of them? Because the EU's top diplomat, I understand, has just said that people aren't going to be forced to go home. So what's going to happen to them sort of over the medium to longer term?
She misspoke. You're talking about what Federica Mogherini, when she announced that the migrants will not be sent back against their will. That is not true. Those who are deemed to be deserving of international protection will not be sent back. That's clear. But the other half, about if you take the historical numbers over the past couple of years, those who are rejected, whose claims are rejected, will be returned back, or at least they will be ordered to go back to be deported. But at the moment, something like only 39% of those who are told to go back actually go back, and the majority stay in Europe. So that's something to consider. And of course, even those who go back might return again. Niels was talking about the success that Spain had in deterring illegal migration and stopping asylum seekers who have a right to file a claim from coming to Spain. But that didn't mean that they stopped coming from Africa to Europe. It meant they stopped coming from Africa to Spain. So when the Spanish stopped, the flows moved to Greece. 3 years ago, the majority of those who were trying to enter Europe went to Greece, and then they shifted, once the Greeks cracked down, they shifted to central Italy. And then the Italians, I think, did a heroic thing in actually saving them. and forcing the European Union to have a different conversation.
So it's sort of like pushing on a balloon where you squeeze one end and the air moves to the other end.
Exactly. And as I said earlier, the majority, the plurality of people crossing into Europe now are going over a land route, not through the Mediterranean. So, yes, you will have a deterrence effect. However, there's another problem, which is you cannot just force the North African and Middle East countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, to take all the refugee burden at this point. So if you bomb some boats, that'll work. You'll destroy some boats, but you'll just anger the governments whose cooperation you need to actually have an effective deterrence policy. So unless you open up safe, legal channels for people to get to Europe in a way that's proportionate to your wealth and your ability to absorb them, then you will not have the partnerships that you need with North Africa and with others to be able to crack down on the smugglers, which is certainly one part of this.
Aurora Moreno, let me ask you about that point then. So there are tens of thousands of people who have been gathered in these camps in Italy and in Greece who are being taken care of, at least in the short term. There's tension emerging between several northern European countries and Italy and Greece about what to do with them. I believe the United Kingdom has accepted something like less than 200 of these people here. So what's going to happen next?
Well, it's going to be very difficult because the truth is that the European Union has not a common policy on this topic, and every state can take their own decisions. And by now, the European Union has tried. They have said a few days ago we will have to install quotas for them, but all the countries have already said they don't agree, especially United Kingdom and Denmark, but also countries like Spain and Italy have already said we have enough. People from Germany has also said we are supporting a lot of refugees from other places. It's going to be very difficult. I think the European countries should take a resolution, should agree with something and show the solidarity they say we are used to ask to others and to talk about, because it's first of all because as Gregory was saying, they are going to continue coming. We must to find a solution. We have to store legal channels for them to come here, and we have to do something with the ones that are already here. I mean, we cannot just simply take them back to a country in the war. Where are we going to leave them now? Or to a country like Somalia, 20 years without a real state. How are we going to do that? I mean, we cannot even think of that.
I mean, in many ways, it really is a moral quagmire. And Niels Frenzen, I wanted to ask you, a significant percentage of the people that are coming are children. And so what are the responsibilities of the destination governments for minors?
I mean, and not only are they children, a significant number of them are unaccompanied children. They are children who are traveling alone. And the vulnerabilities that presents to the children are obviously, even more heightened. Again, under international law, a state, even if that child doesn't have a legitimate refugee claim, a state, a receiving state, has special obligations to protect that child when that child comes into contact with the state. I believe of the roughly 200,000 individuals who crossed the Mediterranean last year, estimates are upwards of 15,000 of those were unaccompanied children. So it's a major humanitarian disaster that again requires a humanitarian response, not a sealing of the borders, not a militaristic response.
Gregory Maniatis, talk to us a little bit about how domestic politics within Europe are affecting this debate, because we have seen that far-right parties that are anti-immigrant in nature have made significant gains in the United Kingdom, in France, in the Netherlands. How is that shaping this?
So I think, obviously, there have been gains made by far-right parties, but they're not as extensive as you might think, and I don't think that they're a result of the failure of mainstream parties to keep them out, keep migrants and asylum seekers out. It's a failure of mainstream parties to be seen as exerting control over the flows. And that doesn't mean that you have to keep them out. It means that you have to bring them in an orderly way to determine who is deserving of protection, and then to return those who are not deserving of protection. The issue with the Europeans right now is that they're not doing that. It's a very chaotic system. I think if you look at the polling numbers in Europe, in many countries, there is much more of an acceptance of legal migration, and certainly of refugees, than there is when you just look at numbers about migration in general. People are willing to accept legal migration and refugees. In fact, in Germany, in late April, there was a poll that showed that even at the height of this disaster in the Mediterranean, and with record numbers of people coming to Germany, that the majority of the German people were willing to accept more refugees.
Aurora Moreno, our time is growing short. Where do you think this issue is heading? What do you think this issue will look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now?
Well, it's hard to say, but I hope if well, I think maybe with the end, or what seems to be the end of the crisis, it's possible that European countries take their responsibility on this situation, but I think it will continue. People will continue coming, and I think we need to give an immediate response and a response to long term also.
And Niels Frenzen, last word to you with just about 30 seconds to go. What do you foresee in the near term?
Well, I mean, people will continue to move, and it's just a question as to what level will that movement be. As long as we have the situation in Syria, one of the worst refugee crises that we've had since the end of World War II, we will see tremendous demand for protection on the part of Syrians. As long as we have a totalitarian country government in Eritrea, we will see Eritreans fleeing. If those problems are solved at their roots, that will reduce the numbers of people traveling, but people will continue to travel, and there needs to be a legal and humanitarian response to the movement of people.
That'll do it for this edition of Global Journalist, a production of the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Many thanks to Niels Frenzen, Aurora Moreno, and Gregory Maniatis for joining us. Global Journalist executive producer is Joshua Kransberg. Our assistant producers this week are Joaquin Hernandez, Lucrezia Lotza, and Rafaela Iacovella. Global Journalist studio director is Travis McMillan from RJI, and our audio engineer is Pat Akers of KBIA. For all of us at Global Journalist, I'm Jason McClure. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.